Welcome to Eat, Sleep, Wine, Repeat, a podcast for all you wine lovers who, if you're like me, just cannot get enough of the good stuff. I'm Janina, your host, brand ambassador, wine educator, and sommelier. So stick with me as we dive deeper into this ever-evolving, wonderful world of wine. And wherever you are listening to this, cheers to you. Hello, wine friends, and welcome back. Today, I have a sparkling treat for you. Joining me is Tom Hewson, champagne correspondent for Decanter magazine. He was also a finalist in the 2024 67 Pall Mall Global Wine Communicator Awards for his Substack, 6 Atmospheres, which is entirely dedicated to sparkling wine. Tom's journey is really fascinating, from a jazz musician to sparkling wine expert, and he has an unparalleled depth of knowledge on both champagne and English sparkling wines. So, in this episode, we're diving into everything you need to know about these fizzes, from climate and terroir to grape varieties, rising stars like Pinot Meunier, sustainability, soil diversity, yields, agro-tourism, and, well, so much more. We will be comparing and contrasting champagne and English sparkling wine, and this episode is packed with insights, stories, and practical knowledge. But before we get started, a quick reminder: if you are enjoying the podcast, please leave a rating or review on the app you're listening to, because it really just helps the show reach more wine lovers and keeps this fizz-filled content coming your way. So pour yourself a glass of something bubbly and let's get sparkling with Tom Hewson. So, Tom, let's start with you. You have so much information about champagne and English sparkling wine and sparkling wines of the world, but you did start as a jazz musician, no? So jazz musician to sparkling wine expert. I mean, was that the plan?
No, I've never had a plan.
Normally the best way, actually.
Yeah, I've always been a musician, and the wine thing started in a way. My dad's midlife crisis, I think, in retrospect, was to plant some vines in Kent in the year 2002.
Yes.
And so I kind of grew up with them. Not many, it was 500, kind of crazy amount. I kind of grew up with this vineyard sort of out the back and kind of interested in it. And then I got into wine. So even though I've been a musician for 10, 15 years, professionally pre-COVID, that's all I did, 100% being a musician, I always had the wine thing bubbling away.
Bubbling,
geekily. And then when COVID came, it wiped out career number one and overnight, at least, and then I sort of thought, okay, well, I'll what else do I know about? Pretty much wine was the only other thing. And so I kind of chipped away at that over COVID, and then out the other side, I've kind of found a balance, which today is actually mostly in the wine world, and I'm still playing and doing music as well. But it was not a deliberate sit down and change my career thing. But as with many things in life, it just sort of happened. And here we are.
Here you are, and I'm very happy because English sparkling wine and English wine, of course, is a love of mine and a passion. And you've written the English sparkling wine 2020, if anyone wants to read that. You did the English wine report for Tim Atkin, the 2022. Is there another one coming?
No, so for Tim, there was a report following year, 2022, wasn't it? And then 2021 maybe as well. I can't remember. This is getting a back. It's moved on, and now since last year, I've been covering it for the Wine Advocates. So I'm not writing on English wine reports for Tim anymore. I'm writing on Spain for Tim, which is great. So I get a bit of sunshine. And England is for Wine Advocate in the US, predominantly. Yeah.
I mean, how is it you're putting together a report of English wine? You're having to taste how many wines, assess them, write them up in such detail. I mean, that's a mammoth project, right?
It is in a way, but I suppose covering it feels very manageable compared to champagne, which is the majority of my work for Decanter. But I mean, England it is actually remarkable. I have to really try and keep up now. The first few years, each year there might be 2 or 3 new wineries maybe popping up. At the moment, it seems like 10 or 20 new names are popping up every year, and I'm having to try and keep up with them. And and then sometimes a winery will pop up, and I've never even heard that they exist or had vines or anything. The growth has been kind of remarkable. So I do have to work pretty hard to keep up, and tasting. It sounds silly, but I think of maybe 500 wines as not that much to taste. For most people, they kind of go, really? But it's kind of in that figure of around 500.
And you're not doing it in one day, are you? So
no, thankfully.
Are you? No. So actually, you've mentioned how English sparkling wine tasting is so much easier to champagne because of the sheer size. This episode is very much about comparing the two, so everybody can actually understand the similarities, compare and contrast. So let's talk about the size of English wine in terms of hectares planted compared to champagne. Have you seen the latest figures?
I haven't seen. I think they're pushing well above 4,000 hectares now.
Yeah, that's what I have.
Yeah. The figures they tend to be a little bit behind the official figures, what's been planted, because it takes them a bit of a time to pop up. I thought I saw something like 4,700, but in rough sense, what the headline is really that England is over 10% the size of Champagne now, well over 10% as a vineyard area, but not all of that is for sparkling wine. So if you're talking about, because about 60% of English vineyard, or 70%, depending on the year, 60, something like that, goes to sparkling wine, you can kind of say that England is, for English sparkling wine, is round about 10% the vineyard surface of Champagne, if you compare the two. So not an absolute minnow anymore, actually. It's considering that I was speaking to a person that's worked in English wine for 25 years. And he thought when he started in the early 2000s, there were about 50 hectares of Chardonnay in the whole country. So, the growth is absolutely extraordinary. But it's still, smaller than any of Champagne's sub-regions or anything. It's still relatively small.
And how big is Champagne?
It's under 40. Oh, yeah, 34,300.
It's a bit bigger than England.
Yeah.
And I have we have now the latest statistics, 1,030 vineyards in the UK. How cute are we? But that, again, if you compare it to the growers in Champagne, which again, numbers, I've got 16,000, 19,000. This is always good old Champagne. Thank you for not releasing all of the numbers.
So Champagne is completely different, not only from England, but from pretty much all sort of New World wine regions. Or lots of European regions, because you turn up on the train in Champagne and it's a sea of vines around Saint-Epinay, and it looks like a huge vineyard, but that vineyard is divided into teeny parcels. Some of the average of them is absolutely minuscule, like tennis courts, or and families and growers own teeny parcels dotted all over the place. They're fantastically expensive to buy. 90% of the vineyard you're looking at is owned by growers who sell the fruit to champagne makers. So grower champagne is actually quite a small category of growers who make their own champagne. But actually, when we talk about those 16,000 odd growers in Champagne, most of those are simply farmers in a way. They're growing grapes and selling them. Whereas in England, the growth of England is a bit more New World-like, in the sense that it's more about big estates and how much they plant, and it's sort of estate production. So there is definitely a market for grapes, and people grow grapes like farmers and sell them. But it's a kind of a very different system. We don't have quite so much reliance on that kind of grower-buyer relationship. Like Champagne is really, really crazy in that sense.
But then also, this is a region, Champagne, that has hundreds of years of history. And so they've slowly worked out, who wants to be where, what's the better plots. You've got 17 Grand Crus in Champagne and 42 Premier Crus. And in England, we, of course, have none, because we're new, we're shiny and sparkling in many senses. So, for you, having tasted lots of English sparkling wines, do you feel that we really are close to perhaps defining a Grand Cru site, a special site? We talk about Kitts County. I often talk about the Crouch Valley in general. What do you think?
Right, I'm going to give you a simple answer, which is no. I mean, in a way, in Champagne, if you're going to really compare them, it took decades or actually centuries to kind of get to that understanding. And I think, yes, of course, in England, there are vineyards that over perhaps now 5, 10 years have shown a great deal of potential. But it's almost what makes the Grand Crus in Champagne is kind of like they perform every year. They yield quite well every year. They were financially good for growers. So, they were sought after because they were reliable. The Grand Crus in Champagne are the chalky sites as well, with the chalky soils that drained well and were frost resistant, and because they drained well, Champagne used to be a bit wetter, a bit colder. They would ripen up quite reliably well. England, we have a lot more today, like scientific approach to where we plant vineyards, and we're definitely seeing the results of that. But many of those vineyards are still pretty young, and I don't think we are seeing like a movement to try and geographically unpick England a bit and say, here Sussex is like this and Kent is like this, and in general. That is so far, in my view, is more of a kind of marketing thing than a really useful approach to unpicking English wine and creating vineyards of kind of Grand Cru quality. I think that will come, and I don't think it's coming anytime soon myself. But we will see, Crouch Valley. We will see maybe Kent. We will, we already have a Sussex PDO. Which
we're not going to talk about that one on this one.
Yeah. And of course, there is already one crazy little English PDO, which is Bob Lindo down in Cornwall, who made one for his Bacchus, which is brilliant. So it's useful for marketing, the idea of an English Grand Cru, but I'm not sure we're going to see it anytime particularly soon.
Well, okay. I mean, you've talked about, some of the regions. We know that Kent, and if it wraps around to Sussex, basically and Essex, we're talking the southeast of England. This is the sunniest, this is the driest. Would you, at the very least, rather than actually talking about counties, do you feel that we can slowly start defining the southeast compared to down in Cornwall, the southwest, maybe compared to the north of England, and then perhaps Wales? Because we can see quite clearly it gets colder when you go up north. They aren't planting Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. They're focusing on grape varieties like Solaris and hybrids and Piwi varieties, which maybe we'll get onto. So do you feel that there's maybe 4 areas of England? Could we say that?
I think that's pretty sensible. I think there are some, when you look at Champagne and you look at England, there are some similarities in that, like, if you look at the far west of Champagne, Champagne and England, we both share the fact that the majority of our wet weather systems coming in from the west. So the west of both regions tends to be wetter. So you see that in Champagne, down the end of the Marne Valley, the bit nearest Paris, tends to be a lot wetter than the Montagne de Reims or the Côte des Blancs in the more easterly parts of the region. That we do see that in the UK. Rainfall, obviously, anyone's been on holiday in Wales and Cornwall knows it can be absolutely beautiful, but you're also taking a bit more of a risk than if you head out to the Suffolk coast on the east coast or something. And we do tend to see in England that harvest is a bit later for the Champagne varieties. One of the top producers is Langham in Dorset, so that's probably, I might annoy some people here, but I'd say it's probably the furthest west really high quality traditional wine producer, or one of the furthest west traditional method, high quality sparkling wine. They're going to be later to harvest pretty much every year than producers in Kent, for example, growing sparkling wine. So they're running a bit more of a gauntlet down there in that sense. It's always going to be a little bit riskier, even in Hampshire, sometimes is you often a little bit later, but you got to remember in England, we're, being on a knife edge, it means it's a bit easier to fall off either way. So in a warm year, they could be a beautiful place. And in a difficult year, the differences of tiny little differences in with your exposure of your vineyard, or how cool it is, or how wind affected it is, can make the difference between going really nice grapes and growing grapes that aren't quite there. So, the vintage variation is so huge that these days, I think, maybe 20 years ago, if you'd said, okay, I'm going to plant some Chardonnay in Dorset, they'd have gone, really? And nowadays you can kind of think, okay, well, we might have some difficult years, but actually the track record over the last 5 is not too bad.
However, I would say that, yes, the warming temperatures have really benefited us, haven't they, in England, in terms of, we can grow these grapes, but it doesn't mean that warmer equals better or warmer equals, I suppose, easier.
No.
Because now you get what I always like to describe as climate chaos.
Yeah.
But I don't think that's any different than champagne now, or the rest of the
Champagne is
world.
well in the climate chaos. I always scratch my head a little bit when I see news stories all the time of, champagne's getting too hot for champagne. And this was a beloved line of some English growers that I've encountered over the time. Well, champagne's getting too hot. We've got the best climate for it here, really. And actually, it's much more complex. I mean, climate chaos, like 2023 in Champagne, I was there during the harvest. And one of the problems that they had is that they got, because it's warmer, the grapes were ripening beautifully. But then when the rains hit, it's really warm. And you put together warmth and moisture and you get explosions of rot. So, they had a horrendously difficult harvest because of that. And that is climate chaos. It's not the fact that, the grapes are too ripe or there's too much alcohol. I mean, sometimes that's true and sometimes it is more complicated. But, when you're living in climate chaos, you're living in a time when actually things like that are perhaps even more of a risk, high rainfall during high temperatures. And England is definitely benefiting from warmer temperatures, 100%. No questions asked, but we still had some of those problems in 2023. We still had some drought in 2022. I mean, I saw drought-stressed vines in England. Well, it wasn't Essex, but I mean that you'd have said that to an English grower 20 years ago, and they'd have laughed their heads off. I mean, the idea that you could get drought stress in an English vineyard, I mean, would have seemed completely ridiculous. So, yes, absolutely true. It's overall. We have to say it a bit quietly, but yeah, of course. I mean, if you want to take any climate change denier you can find, just bring them to England and show them some Pinot Noir in Essex ripening up to 13.5 degrees, 14 degrees.
Apparently, yeah. Some of them are saying they can get to 14, which
I have
is
done,
insane.
yes, in the past. Some did in 2022, got over 14. And that's skilled growing as well. But, it's if it stays dry and you're good at growing grapes and you can keep them on the vine and you're in a warm part of the country and you get a good head start, then you can absolutely get Pinot Noir and Chardonnay there in England. Yeah.
Incredible. Well, we are talking about 2 cool regions, Champagne and England. However, England has a maritime climate and Champagne is actually more continental. So should we really be comparing? They're harvesting in August. We don't start till really typically more like the end of September and then going through to October.
Yep.
How similar are we?
Yeah, quite similar. I mean, it's the maritime and continental. So essentially, Champagne is more tucked into continental Europe, which means essentially it's got less of the moderating influence of the sea. But Champagne is kind of in between too. So some years they have what they call sort of maritime years, where they're going to get more weather systems coming in. They have more temperate summers, they have a bit more rainfall, they don't have huge heat spikes. Some years they have more continental years like 2020, 2022, where they are having big build-ups of heat over the continent. They're having fewer weather systems, So they do get a more continental climate. I mean, even within the UK, what growers tend to find is there's a big difference if you go inland. So there's been a bit of a growth of interest in vineyards in west of London in an area called the Chilterns and Oxfordshire, and you look at sort of north parts of Hampshire and up in that area where it is a bit more continental in a sense. You're further from the sea, you get sometimes a bit more build up in warmth because you're a bit further from the sea. But the downside is frost. So, the downside of continental is if you tread too much in that, you don't get because you're away from the sea can protect you a little bit from frost. So it's a kind of a lot of times I've spoken to people in England, it's kind of finding that point in between the sea and the inland where you're kind of maritime, but not too maritime. And this kind of dynamic of going inland, outland, England is it's like growing grapes here is like walking on a tightrope. Tiny little things will make the difference between do you have a great vineyard or do you have a really challenging vineyard. It's such a delicate balance because we are so much on the edge. But yeah, we are quite different in that extent. We definitely always going to have more oceanic, more wet weather coming in from the west. When you get to the east, we're drier than Champagne, actually, in Essex. I speak regularly to a few growers in Essex, and sometimes, their main stress, when they're stressed because they're not having enough rain. That is their normal stress pattern. It's not, oh God, here comes another storm. It's, I've just planted 12,000 vines and it hasn't rained in 6 weeks, and I have to go out with my tractor and water them. And that's, they've had to do that, And in Champagne, yes, they absolutely do get water stress. It's a big topic now. But yes, the parts of eastern UK are pretty dry, even compared to Champagne. Yeah.
Well, it just goes to show, I think people listening may actually be quite shocked about that.
Yeah.
Well, they might also be shocked to hear that, Champagne is reacting to warmer weather, more humid weather, as you were saying. So they have just started, well, not just, planting Voltis, which as far as I believe, this is the first hybrid grape to actually be planted in any French appellation within the rules.
Voltis is like a modern hybrid, i.e. there's various generations of hybrid grapes and what's called peewees and things like that. And essentially Voltis in Champagne, Voltis is a pretty new grape variety. It was actually part of a French program to develop resistant grape varieties. That is not Champagne specific. So Voltis could, I think it might be authorized in Bordeaux as well. I have to check that. So it's not a Champagne specific variety, but Champagne has been a bit ahead of the game in actually getting it in the ground. This is true. And I believe there's probably more in Champagne than any other AOC, but there's still not very much. And it's mostly planted because it needs less spraying. Like I was saying about the sea of vineyards, the reason really that Voltis is being planted is that they have legislation there, which means you can't spray near houses and people's schools and buildings. And so they have, you have tiny, nice villages where the vines are going right up to the village. And so if you actually, they have what's called a treatment zone, and it means you can plant Voltis in theory near houses and people where people live and work, and it needs much less treatment and spraying, which is healthier for the residents there. Whether I've seen Voltis in Champagne, I've seen it a couple of times.
Okay.
Like I saw some down in Drapier in the Côte des Bars, and they had in 2024 their vineyard in the Côte des Bars got absolutely destroyed by downy mildew. It was like a wasteland. I mean, lots of people harvested nothing. And I saw a plot of Pinot Noir next to a plot of Voltis, and the Voltis had green leaves, was hanging on quite well. And the Pinot Noir there was zero, it was nothing. So the wine quality of Voltis, jury is a little bit out on that yet. We'll have to see. Some people are fairly dismissive of it, but it only can be used for, I think it's 10% of a blend.
It's interesting that they are being proactive, and we'll see. And I think also this is still a 10-year almost experiment. So if they don't like it, it's all going to be like pulled up and then it never happened and taken away and not allowed, right? I think so. It's permitted as a variety, but so far only for a certain amount of years.
I think it will stay authorized, but would be my guess, because ultimately if people don't want it, no one will plant it. If people don't want to buy it, no one will plant it. And Champagne, like I said, it's really a buyer's market. It's a kind of 90% is grown to sell. So if no one's going to plant varieties that no one wants to buy, ultimately.
Okay, interesting. You're talking about planting varieties or varieties in the ground that obviously must be there for a reason. if we ignore Voltis, there are actually 7 permitted grape varieties in Champagne, which many people don't know about.
Yeah.
So if you're taking away the 3 major ones, then you have Pinot Gris, Pinot Blanc, Petit Meslier, and Arbanne. I was really, really excited. Last year, I got to try a bottle of wine from Champagne, Aspasia. Hopefully, I'm pronouncing their name right. And it was their cépages d'Antin. And it was a blend of Arbanne, Petit Meslier, and Pinot Blanc. And
Yes.
that was brilliant. That's the only wine I've ever had from Champagne using interesting varieties. I've heard that Duval-Leroy, or Leroy, I'm not pronouncing his name with a French accent.
Yes, Duval-Leroy.
Is that it? I was going to say, I know I wasn't saying it right. Duval-Leroy has done several vintages with 100% Petit Meslier. So can you, talk to me about any maybe experiences you've had with any of these lost, forgotten varieties? Because they're less than 1% of the plantings in Champagne, but
0.5.
they're there. 0.5.
Yes.
Okay, talk to me.
So basically, the other Champagne varieties fall into 2 camps. You've got the lesser seen Pinots. So you've got Pinot Gris and Pinot Blanc, or they call them Fromenteaux for Pinot Gris, and you tend to see Blanc Vrai for Pinot Blanc. And they're dotted about. Yeah, they why would they like to have their own names for things? That's okay.
Good for them.
We can give them that. And most Pinot Blanc is in the Aube, in the south of Champagne. Historically, a lot of it is there. And there's bits of Pinot Gris dotted about. And there are even a few Pinot Gris Champagnes. I think I've tried 2. Would Drapier make one, which is good fun. So really wacky stuff, very small amounts, very fun, very spicy, floral, very different. Pinot Blanc it's a little bit, there's a bit more of it in the Côte des Bar, and actually, it was historically there more than Chardonnay. Chardonnay is more of an incomer, and Pinot Blanc is the kind of more historical white grape.
What happened?
What happened is people wanted Chardonnay because the quality of Chardonnay and the brightness and the elegance of it. Commercially, Chardonnay is a latecomer to Champagne, really second half of 19th century into 20th century, and houses paid for it. They paid good money for Chardonnay, encouraged people to plant Chardonnay. The Côte des Bar in the south of Champagne was full of Gamay. They all had to dig. Gamay was in Champagne, the Beaujolais grape. So, if you talk to growers down there, their parents were growing Gamay, and that was going into Champagne. And that was forced to be pulled up. But the Pinot Blanc was allowed to stay, and Pinot Gris. And they can make fun little blends, and there are a few people that make 100% Pinot Blanc champagnes, which are quite round and fruity and exotic and can be lovely. And then you've got the other 2. You've got the Arbanne and the Petit Meslier, and they're more, you could think of those more together as slightly more, they make slightly more angular wines, slightly different. They feel different to the Pinots. They can be quite herbaceous. They're late ripening. That's why people like them for climate change, Petit Meslier, Arbanne is very late ripening. They're grumpy grapes. They're like, the growers describe them like, really difficult children that they kind of like, you're trying to get them to bed at sort of 8 o'clock and you're still there at 11. Okay, just ripen, please. And tiny yields. They can be quite difficult to grow, but they ripen a lot later and retain a lot of acidity and low pH. So they're kind of fun, particularly for blending. I've never fallen massively in love myself with 100% Petit Meslier or Arbanne, but there are some great examples around. There's a nice grower in the Côte des Blancs called Etienne Calzac, who makes wine he's a bit of a Petit Meslier specialist, and even some of the houses are experimenting with co-planting them, like Louis Roeder has got some in Cumières, and it's definitely, we're not going to see champagnes 100% made of these varieties widely, but we're seeing a few more that have got them blended in for a bit of energy and a bit of something different. You should definitely go out and hunt some down.
Well, so as you know, many people listening, I used to work for Balfour Winery, and one of my biggest USPs that I loved is that they are the only winery in England to have all 7 permitted varieties from Champagne. And there is a row just one row. We're talking 200 vines, one row to Petit Meslier, one row to Arbanne. And actually then there's a row right next to it, Pinot Blanc. And I have to say, you said low yielding Petit Meslier and Arbanne. In last year when it was not a great year, not last year, sorry, the year before when it wasn't a great year. Yeah, for yielding. And I was walking through the vineyard and my God, I have never in my life ever seen, there was what would normally be a bunch. Maybe there was 6 grapes on one, maybe 8 grapes on. They were pathetic.
I've spoken to Fergus about this before. I have joked a little bit with him because I was in Champagne at the Champagne experimental vineyard a few weeks ago, where they have some Arbanne, and I posted a picture of it. And actually, yes, Fergus messaged me and said, my Arbanne doesn't look like that, but there was, and I kind of said, well, maybe it ripened this year, because it was so warm. And I think, it's growing Arbanne in England that's extreme sport. I mean, that is viticulturally the equivalent of kind of skydiving. That is really, you're going to be probably harvesting that in November a lot, I'd imagine.
Well, I'm not sure exactly about the dates of harvesting, but I suppose I remember speaking with Fergus. For anyone who wonders why we're saying Fergus, this is the head winemaker at Balfour. He has said that why not experiment? That's the wonderful joy of England. We don't necessarily have any rules, but also our land as well is not cheap, but it is still a hell of a lot cheaper than buying a plot of land in Champagne. Now, I actually don't have those numbers in front of me at all. Do you? Do you know
how much it costs? Well, I've not been checking the land agents recently in Champagne. Even if we sold our house in London, I don't think I'd be able to afford very much Champagne vineyard. I mean, it's many millions of euros a hectare in what, 1, 2, something like that. I'd have to check recently.
Wait, I'm Googling right now. The average cost, this is AI Google that I don't know, is telling me
I'm going to guess
1.1 million per hectare.
And of course, that will vary a lot between the land, because in Grand Cru, it's going to be higher than that, I'd imagine. And if you want to buy a bit of land down the end of the Marne Valley or in the Côte d'Ivoire or in Vitriat or something, it's going to be cheaper. But yes, whereas in England, you're back when I was looking, but I was involved in a potential project. It was kind of 25 grand. That was a while ago, but it's more now. It's definitely a lot more now, 40, 50 or something.
No, well, actually, apparently a cost of a hectare in Kent, everyone listening who doesn't know Kent, we are talking the southeast of England, it's saying 27,100 per hectare. But again, yes, and that's just standard arable land, not what might be for a vineyard.
Nowadays, we have people have cottoned on. So the land agents they've got viticultural divisions that that actually are specialised in selling vineyard land, and that definitely goes for a lot more than that. But it's still peanuts compared to Champagne. Absolutely, yeah.
So I want to get back to grape varieties because I do find it fascinating. Pinot Meunier, so one of the major 3, but still, poor Meunier has always been, back of the classroom, just, it's all about Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. But certainly in England, Meunier is having its day. There's incredible single varieties from Gusbourne. I just saw Walgate Wines. Ben's just released a wine. Of course, Balfour has done the Red Miller.
That's it, yeah.
And they only did it in 2018. And finally, apparently, 2025, another one's coming. Very, very exciting. And now Osbrook is doing a white Meunier.
Oh, really?
Simpsons, actually very interesting. Simpsons does a rosé Meunier.
Yes.
Of course, you've got the sparkling Meuniers from Exton Park and Harrow and Hope. So we love it. It seems that I don't know whether it's the climate, but I think more it's that we actually haven't been told it's not as good a grape, and that people are just putting attention to it. So I am aware of, I'm going to butcher his name, Jérôme Prévost.
Oh, yes.
In Champagne. He focuses on Meunier. Are there younger producers in Champagne also really embracing this grape now?
Absolutely.
Yes, is it up and coming in Champagne too?
I mean, Meunier in Champagne is a major grape. It's single
varietals.
Yeah, even
100% focus. I'm talking about.
Yeah, even if you go west of Reims and you drive for about 10-15 minutes and you keep driving for an hour down the Marne Valley, probably 70% of what you're going to see is Meunier. Once you get out of like the Grand Valley in the Epernay, it's very largely Meunier down there. And so if you are a grower there, that's what you got.
Okay.
So there is quite a lot of this. It doesn't. Yes, it's true that it doesn't get exported, or it's lots of small producers, lots of up and coming producers, but there's certainly a lot of Meunier. I think the misunderstanding about Meunier comes from the fact that it's only really found in Champagne. There's tiny amounts in Germany and things, and it was always planted in very specific places in Champagne because it's more frost resistant. So it was planted in the vineyards like that were low lying, a bit cooler, often on clay or heavier soils, a bit more frost resistant. Basically, it wasn't planted in the Premier and Grand Cru plots. So our understanding of what Meunier is actually really coloured by the terroir which it was grown in as well, which was probably a bit fruitier, a bit rounder. And actually, in Champagne, there's some amazing Meunier that is really elegant and almost quite mineral, and there's some amazing stuff when it comes from different terroir, more chalky terroir. And in the UK, I think we're starting to see that Meunier, I think, is a really, really excellent variety for some of the slightly more exposed or chalky vineyards we have here as well, because in Champagne, they say that Meunier, you can take Meunier in like 9.5, 10% alcohol, whereas Pinot, Chardonnay, you're really going to need to leave it out to get 10.5. It's like it gets to a nice flavor sometimes at a little bit lower alcohol. It's not necessarily loads earlier to ripen than Pinot Noir, but it just behaves itself a little bit. It's just a bit hardier. If you imagine like Pinot Noir is the person that needs to go out, with their scarf and their hat and their coat. It's like Meunier will go out in a jumper and be like, oh, it's right. Meunier is just a bit of a. It doesn't mind. I mean, it's still a fragile grape. It can still get rot. It's still got. It's not necessarily easier, but it can, because it dodges the frost a little bit. And it makes quite fruity, quite fragrant, quite approachable wines. And in England, one of our Achilles heels is high acidity, or like quite pointed, quite austere wines. And Meunier, sometimes it's just a bit friendlier. So I think it really is really well suited to the UK. And I'm glad to see that I think the plantings have been slowly growing. Whereas at the beginning of the English sparkling wine kind of growth, everyone was a bit snooty about it because Champagne was a bit snooty about it.
Well, we'll see how that goes. But it's interesting. You touched on the fact that actually in the Valley de la Marne, where there is most Meunier, it's actually not as chalky soils. And in England, we talk about chalk all the time because of the Paris Basin connection. But actually, our soils are quite varied. We have great green sand soils. We have clay. Of course, we have lots of chalk. But then so does Champagne, if you look closely. There's sands, there's clays, there's marls. So talk to everybody listening, because it's not just all about chalk in both locations. Yeah. How much chalk does Champagne actually have?
In essence, the chalky part of Champagne is centered around the Grand Cru parts, which is most of the Montagnes and the Côte des Blancs and what's called the Grande Vallée. So essentially, if you've ever been to Champagne and you arrive in either Reims or Epernay, between those two places and around the cities, like to the south of Reims and to the north and south of Epernay, you can drive it, in half an hour or 40 minutes. But outside of there, that's still only a part of the Champagne appellation. And as soon as you get like west of Reims, or you get west of Epernay, there's all these in-betweeny bits of Champagne, even in the north, that they're not really very chalky at all. Partly the Marne Valley, the Petite Montagne de Reims, all the north of Champagne, sands. Basically the way that the Paris Basin worked is, as you get west, you're getting to newer soils. So post-dinosaur soils, essentially. And when you're in post-dinosaurs, the dinosaurs had chalk. They could make good champagne. No, I mean, I'm being facetious. But essentially, post-dinosaurs, we're getting sands and clays and what we call tertiary soils. On top of the chalk is still there, but it's buried deep. So there's tons of champagne where the chalk is too deep to actually really affect the viticulture at all. And then in the far south of Champagne, the beautiful Côte des Bar region is actually much, much older soils than the chalk, Kimmeridgian soils, which comes from the Dorset. We have those in England as well. They're slightly different, but yeah, it's the traditional view in England has been, doesn't really matter what soil you have. You just need to be warm enough to ripen the grapes. Just don't worry about it. Now, as we're getting warmer, we may be starting to think, okay, maybe we need to look at this a bit more, and it does affect the vines a lot. But I think it's broadly true that in England, the primary thing that you have tasted in the wine is this a warm enough vineyard to get the grapes properly ripe? And then maybe once you pass that threshold, you can start to talk about terroir a little bit more. But in truth, being on a knife edge, the first question is, are you still on it or have you fallen off? And then if you're still on it, okay, well, let's talk about soil and let's talk about all these things. And in Champagne these days, you can ripen grapes everywhere pretty easily, 7, 8, 9, 10 years out of 10. And vines are old. People have a real understanding of their terroir, and we see a bit more of a clear link, I think, with soil and wine.
But do you think, though, that soil diversity in England, because there is going to be a big advantage going forward, or actually is that a complication because it's just too much too soon?
No, I think it's definitely an advantage. I think it just depends on people understanding the performance of what they've got, and water is a huge part of it. Like in Essex. Part of why Essex is so interesting is the behavior of the soil in Essex. And part of the reason that the grapes, obviously it's warm and dry, but part of the reason that the still wine boom is happening in parts of Essex is because of the way the soils there, which were traditionally viewed as pretty rubbish for vines by, 20 years ago, people have started to understand that they can do some pretty interesting things for still wine ripening in particular. They can stress the vines out at the right time, this kind of thing. And I think the challenge slightly more for English sparkling wine going forward, if we keep getting warmer, is really that we have probably a lot of vineyards that might not be on super optimal soils for sparkling wine. People might disagree with me on that. But I think we've seen a movement to chalk with planting in the last 10, 20 years, and a lot of big investments in chalk. All the big growers, Chapeldown, Nye Timber, have gone in big on chalk vineyards that are still quite young. And whilst the chalk is sometimes those sites are a bit higher up, a bit more exposed, they're a bit later to ripen, a bit more difficult sometimes. I think in the long run, it is proven that it can do wonderful things for sparkling wine because of very geeky reasons to do with water and the way chalk behaves, and the way that affects the ripening and the acidity for sparkling wine. And that is really well proven from Champagne. It's logical that it must be similar here, but do we taste it in the wines at the moment? I'm not sure yet.
Okay. Interesting. Well, what about yields? This is another thing that is actually quite different, but as far as I see, we're kind of closing the gap. So it's always been historically that England actually has much lower yield than Champagne. But I think in the other year, we hit about 10 tons per hectare and Champagne was only 11.4.
Right.
So that's not far off at all. And I love that you're smiling at me right now, which means you have a lot to say.
I have a lot to say, and I'm afraid I'm about to disagree with you.
Okay.
Not disagree with you, but I'll point out. So Champagne's yield is not really. Champagne Champagne gives a yield figure
Well, it's
each year,
controlled,
but that
as
is
well.
the yield that is allowed to become champagne. And what they actually
yeah.
grow on the vines is often a lot larger. In England, we're kind of like, we'll take what we get.
We'll do what we can.
Yeah, exactly. Get every last grape off those vines. Because, in the UK, I know a lot of the big businesses, like, the big producers here bank on 5 to 6 tons per hectare as a business model. And might hope for 8 or 9 or maybe sometimes see 10. In Champagne, it's a really different...
It's a different business model anyway because of what is allowed in Champagne, whereas But, okay, so what would they be getting then in terms of yields if they didn't have the control then?
I've seen 25 tons a hectare in Champagne. I've seen more than that as well for Chardonnay. They can, that is exceptional. But that is what we call like the agronomic yield. Champagne is one of the highest yielding regions in the world because the wine style traditionally was viewed that you could grow quite high yields for sparkling wine because you don't need the concentration that you need for still wine. So also, traditionally the viticulture through the 70s and 80s in Champagne was very much about pump this ground full of nutrients, prune the vines a lot, get as many buds in there as you can. The grapes are expensive, cash in, big yield. So even that culture is still very much alive in Champagne, and Champagne's yields are much higher than any still region. So normally, you what's on the vines for a like conventional growing Champagne could often be 12 to 15, more sometimes for Chardonnay. And then they will be allowed to pick an amount of that and turn it into Champagne each year that is dependent on the sales and this kind of thing. So and then they can keep reserve wines as well. So, but they can grow a lot of grapes there. And England, I've heard of a grower getting something like 15 or 16 in 2018, an exceptional quantity, but we don't get anything like Champagne's yield still. And we have fewer vines per hectare. We plant less densely. We have worse flowering conditions, cooler flowering conditions. We harvest later. The vines find it harder to recover, and we just have low yields, and there's a major issue for commercial viability in England. It's one of the big struggles that we have, no doubt.
So the average, you're quite right, you touched on it, written down is 6 tons per hectare, but quite clearly we can get higher. What I had been told, and so tell me what you think of this, is that we actually are going a bit higher, and we can get higher because also when they take the averages, we are also including a lot of all of the vineyards, which includes hobbyist
absolutely.
vineyards. And as people either stop just doing it and people take it more seriously and the knowledge, people are able to increase those yields. So we are still we are on the uprise, but yes, quite clearly.
We're on it's absolutely true. The professionalism of the growing, everything is going up. And some people are growing absolutely commercially viable yields. And yes, the official figures were always incredibly miserly in England because frankly, a lot of vineyards are just poorly sited, got frosted, low yielding varieties, so the yield figures are definitely going up. But I was surprised. I mean, I was kind of expecting big vineyards to tell me that they banked on 8 or 7, but some are they base their business models often on like 5 to 6 as an average, because some years are still pretty tiny. And obviously we hope we can make more. And the good thing is when we make more in England, no one is going to stop us really from keeping the wine or keeping it a reserve wine. So 2023 was a very generous year. 2018 was a very generous year in the UK, and lots of happy people. But almost, people ran out of winery space in 2023.
This is so true.
People were leaving grapes on the vine. You couldn't.
Yes.
You couldn't pick them all. There was nowhere to put them.
The joy of yields. Yeah. What about pruning, though? Because actually this is another thing to look at, which is that in Champagne, many people don't realise that there is the strict rules on 4 pruning methods, Cordon de Royan, Chablis, you've got Valle de la Marne, and I'm missing... and Guyot, which and interesting. You say Guyot, Guyot.
They say Guyot over there most of the time, but in England we sort of say Guyot. I don't
Guillaume.
think we can say it how we want. If they,
Yes, we
if they can
can.
call Pinot Meunier Fromenteau, we can call Guillaume. I think that's allowed.
So, but we typically go with the Guillaume method. We do double Guillaume as standard. Do you think that's right for us? Do you think that we should have more controls? Do you think it would benefit? Would it help the yields if we prune differently?
I'm not sure most people view the pruning as the kind of the bottleneck for. I mean, people are getting better at pruning. I mean, our vineyards traditionally were not pruned maybe so well, and there's all this modern movement to better understand pruning, and actually pruning is pretty skilled up relatively in the UK these days. But there is a bit more spur pruning happening with Pinots. So some people believe that you can spur pruning, basically like more similar to the French cordon system, is more people believe that can work here. You get more even ripening with it. That's the thing. Whereas when you prune Guyot, you can end up with uneven ripening along the cane, whereas when you prune with little spurs, like each little spur is more similar to itself in a way. So that some people believe that that's the way forward, although traditionally it was viewed that would give you lower yields. So that's growing a bit in the UK. You can't do it with Chardonnay, or at least it's very difficult to do it with Chardonnay, but you can do it with Meunier and Pinot Noir. I mean, in Champagne, you've got to realize the vineyard looks completely different. If you walk around an English vineyard, you're seeing vines at head height. You're seeing, if you want to go and prune a Champagne vineyard, you've got to get in the
Bend
gym.
down.
You've got to take your omega-3. You got to practice your squats. I mean, they have little trolleys that they sit on and they scoot around the vineyard because it's so low. Relatively so, and it's very dense. It's like twice as dense. There's twice as many vines per hectare in Champagne than you see in most English vineyards. So the pruning systems are very adapted to a much more intensive, historically manual. Or they have their tractors they go over 2 rows. They're straddling tractors. We don't have those in the UK. We just have normal fruit tractors for our vineyards. It's things like that. It's just practical.
Yeah, interesting. What about sustainability and biodynamics? So this is a conversation. We won't go into depth on this because that could be a whole other episode. But, I obviously Roederer is a famous one in Champagne that's, I guess, one of the biodynamic pioneers. But actually, I was surprised in England, our lovely humid climate, that Albury Vineyards has a biodynamic vineyard, and Cahill in Wales, over where it gets wet. Quite clearly, they've got a bit of a micro terroir. They are biodynamic. Are you finding that Champagne versus England is one heading more? Is there more biodynamics going on in Champagne? Is any
organics has grown in Champagne, but it keeps getting knocked back a bit. So the difficult years like 2021, basically the major challenge to organic viticulture in Champagne is downy mildew, or they just call it mildew. And this is what wrecked 2021. This is what wrecked havoc in 2024. And treating that organically is a challenge. You use copper and you have to keep going out there again and again and again and again and again. And if it keeps raining, like it did in Champagne in 2021, your vineyards, if you're on, like I was saying earlier, if you're on the clay or on a slope, you can't even get in the vineyard anymore. It becomes too dangerous to spray. So that's when you start to see people are not able to keep up with downy mildew. And that's what happened in 2024 as well. And England, it also happened in some vineyards in 2024, got really hit by downy mildew. And the challenges for organics here are, like you say, largely down to humidity. But more people, there's a slight growth in people planting resistant grape varieties here, which is kind of interesting. The jury is still a little bit out, or we don't have enough data really on the wine quality of some of these resistant varieties to really, I'd be nervous about putting in loads of them and expecting great things, but it'll be really interesting to taste them. It's still pretty rare to find. Like I think you mentioned Albury, and I think of 3 or 4. And some growers in great sites, like Harrow and Hope sparkling wine. I don't think necessarily the wines are certified yet, but I know that Henry has been working organically that site for a number of years now, since after the 2018 vintage. and it's a very warm, dry site with dry soil. And it's, it's if you've got the manpower and the attention, it's an early
It's
ripening
possible.
site. It's certainly possible. I don't. I mean,
Mm.
I think the sense in Champagne is that organics and biodynamics is probably it's at 8% of the vineyard area, around maybe a little bit higher than 8, and I don't think it's going to grow to an enormous percentage until we can solve the downy mildew problem for
Yeah.
organics, and because it relies on copper, and also a lot of people don't really like putting copper on their vineyards because it's toxic.
Yeah.
So I know quite a few growers in Champagne who are basically organic apart from downy mildew. They use systemic products, or they want the ability to use them because they view them not only as more sustainable than being organic, less tractor hours, less diesel, and so the label by biodynamic or organic, it frustrates me because there are great people doing great work, really sustainable work, and they're not going to get those labels. So it's harder to communicate.
There's so much nuance when it comes to sustainability. So I will let you off the hook there.
Yeah.
Let's finish off. You're free. Let's finish off with agro-tourism, because certainly, I mean, that for me is the joy.
Yeah.
Like, when you can go to a vineyard and eat and drink and walk through the vines, this is the happiest parts of living life. So agro-tourism, certainly in the UK, is booming. We have got so many top restaurants now. The cellar doors are all open. How does agro-tourism compare between Champagne and England?
Champagne has come on leaps and bounds even since I started covering it. And I run the risk of, getting letters in the post here. But England is a lot of English vineyard area, and parts of England is very beautiful, very pretty. And Champagne is not all of it is actually a massively beautiful place. It's a Northern European, fairly kind of flat, not, a lot of areas are quite a lot of vineyard and not much nature, although that's kind of changing a little bit. There are some lovely forests and things. And traditionally, it was not necessarily a place that you'd come for wine tourism. Wine professionals would come and things. That has changed a lot. And the Champenois have really cottoned on to the fact that it's really close to Paris. You can get there really easily. The number of top hotels and restaurants, the tourist facilities and wine producers have just absolutely come on. And you must go, if you've not been, you must go to Reims. It's a beautiful city. Epinay is still a bit not such fun as a town, to be honest. There's some good champagne producers there, but you do get out into the towns and villages. Take a car. You can even go on the train. There's a train between Reims and Epinay, which stops in Ailly, so you can visit producers in Ailly. You can have a great time, and you can see more of the Champagne vineyard and the landscape, which parts of it are actually really, really lovely and really beautiful. And it's always a bit of a shame that people just go to Champagne and go to a house in Epinay or something and then get back on the train to Paris or something. You can have a great weekend away, spa weekend, top restaurants. You can do it all in Champagne now.
Lovely. Do you want to, as we finish off, recommend perhaps, is there one champagne house that you just think is so awesome? I mean, can you do that? And then maybe one English vineyard?
Oh dear. Well,
I know that. How do you pick your favorite child?
I mean, it might be obvious in answers in England. I've really admired what Gusbourne have done in the last 10 years. I think consistency-wise, they've been terrific, and they've turned out some terrific wines. Very exciting. And also, Danbury Ridge, the still wines coming out of Essex is phenomenally exciting.
Although sadly, you cannot go to Danbury Ridge as just a customer yet. But you can go to Gusbourne, and you're not the only person to mention that.
Yes.
On a few episodes ago, that was also recommended.
Champagne, favourites. I mean, I have so many. I find it difficult. I find that difficult to answer.
Okay, everyone, just go.
Yeah,
just go.
I love some of the kind of boutique houses like Philippona. I love those wines.
Philippona. Oh
Yeah.
my God, yes.
And I've bought those, and there's loads of growers in the Côte des Blancs that I love, and I've bought for a few years. Andrew and Don Relais, a lovely grower called Guy Brun in Cremont. I love Blanc de Blanc. So the growers of the Côte des Blancs I always follow quite closely. Yeah, I've got a bit more into the Côte des Bars recently after doing a big report for Decanter last year. So I've been trying to discover a bit more down there, which has been fun as well. So I could go on about it, but if you read Decanter, you can read a lot of coverage on the Côte d'Ivoire and find some of my favourites there as well.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Tom. Everybody links to some of Tom's articles or his wine guides will be in the show notes. And Tom, I'll see you in real life with a glass of fizz, perhaps.
Hope so.
Thank you ever so much. You take care.
All right. Thank
you. Bye.
Bye.
So, are you team champagne or English sparkling wine? Hopefully both. Now, next week, I'll be chatting with the director of winemaking at Silver Oak in Napa and Alexandra Valley over in California. Did you know they have their own cooperage? We're going to dive into how barrels are made, why they matter, and how they shape the wines you love. You are not going to want to miss this episode. And to see us out, a sparkling wine quote for you all. So how about one from F. Scott Fitzgerald, who famously said, "Too much of anything is bad, but too much champagne is just right." If he was alive right now, I'm sure he would also say the same for English sparkling wine. Now, wishing you a wonderful week ahead. Keep pouring a little joy into each day. Life is too short for anything less than bubbles. Until next Monday, wine friends. Cheers to you.